Guys, wouldn't your wife or girlfriend love it if you treated her to the very best this Christmas? Now you can, with the world's softest pajamas by Pajamagram. Created by a team of pajama experts, the world's softest PJs are lighter than a cloud, softer than a bunny, like cashmere, only better. She'll love how heavenly they feel. Includes free gift packaging and Christmas delivery is guaranteed. So visit pajamagram.com or call 1-800-GIVE-PJs.
This is the Locker Room Podcast.
With Jordan Rodgers and Cole Cubelic, I'm Pat Bradley. First thing, though, has been the headlines throughout this week, and it's been CTE. So I want to touch on that with you two because of your background, that you're playing football and a lot of friends that you have still in the business. So, Jordan, let's start with you. And I know you saw the article, 111 NFL brains tested, 110 were found to have CTE. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story of the article of the New York Times, but just a little bit of it. What were your thoughts when you first had heard about this?
Well, it's troubling. It's a little bit chilling in nature, I think, as well. I mean, each one of us as players kind of look back over our career every time we see something like this in the headlines and wonder, man, how many of those hits did I take? And in my personal career, I remember very distinctly a few. I mean, I was knocked out cold on the field at one point. Also at Vandy, took a hit that I remember having very reoccurring symptoms as I took hits in later games as well. So it's very troubling. It's scary as a player. Now, from the context, I think, which is important to look at, and you mentioned context, of 110 out of 111 former NFL players showed signs of CTE. Now, there's been about 1,300 players that have passed away since the BU group began examining. Even still, take that context. Even still, if all those other 1,200 had tested negative, you're talking 9-10% of a population. That's still entirely too high to just say, oh, it's just a product of the sport. So there's definitely things that worry me about this. It makes me look back over my career and wonder, am I forgetting my keys because I'm an idiot and I just didn't remember where I put them? Is there parts of this that I need to actually worry about and seek a little more advice on the outside of things that I can do while still early in my age and early off of my career to help assuage some of these symptoms that may be inevitably happening?
And part of what's interesting there, if you look at the numbers, and Cole, our lineman, 44 out of everyone tested, 44 of the linemen were the ones that were found out of the 111, and there were 7 quarterbacks. So, Jordan, you get blindside hits, huge big-time hits when you're at Vanderbilt, but with those linemen, Cole, it is a constant, it seems like, I don't want to say small little pops, but every time the ball is snapped, you're hitting on every single play. It may not be high collision, but it's a constant hit. So that's something that did ever go through your mind when you were playing?
No, absolutely, Pat. And I think what you look at as a lineman is repetitive trauma. And even though the trauma might not be to the extent of some of the hits that you're referring to, whether it's a receiver coming across the middle, being decleated, whether it's a quarterback being blindsided, not seeing a defender coming, someone being dragged to the ground and either hitting their head on the turf or having their head slammed against another helmet, that repetitive trauma that the linemen suffer almost on every play is something that I think we now can probably attribute to causing CTE. Maybe being more responsible for CTE than some of the bigger hits. Because think about it honestly, how much recovery time are you giving your brain if there is a 2 to 4 minute span in between plays, and especially with the pace and tempo of play now, not only in college football but also in the NFL, that repetitive trauma has to be even more disturbing. And it falls right along with everything else that goes with the offensive lineman. We don't get a lot of the credit. We don't get a lot of the big plays. We don't get a lot of the highlights. And so a lot of things fly under the radar. So it was actually one thing that I was pleasantly surprised to see in this study is that bringing to the forefront that repetitive trauma can be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than suffering the severe big highlight hits, so to speak.
Yeah, you just look at those numbers there, and you see with the linemen. Is there something that you've seen, and you played at Auburn back in late 90s, early 2000s, Jordan more recently at Vanderbilt, and has there been anything you've seen that they tried to correct how you do if you don't lead with your helmet, and especially on the offensive line? I know you use a lot of your hands You got a couple kids now, and I'm sure you work with some youngsters on that, and we always talk about how they're changing and teaching youngsters how to tackle better, head up, and everything. Have you seen a change in that, especially on the offensive line?
Along offensive line play, you haven't seen a whole lot of change, Pat, because I don't think the emphasis has been placed there. Kind of like what I just went back and referenced with, it's good that this is being brought to the forefront, that linemen can be affected as much, if not more, with that repetitive trauma. But I don't think offensive line play is being changed how it's played in any form or fashion. I mean, your hat, your headgear, your face mask, and where that placement is set to be on every play is critical as far as technique and fundamentals go in playing the offensive line spot. And that goes from a tackle to a guard to a center. And a lot of times that head placement is going to be into the shoulder pad or into the helmet of a defender. I mean, if I'm playing center and I got a zero nose guard, we're trying to run inside zone, I mean, sometimes I'm going head up with the zero nose, or if I'm trying to reach a 3 technique, I'm trying to put my face mask across his, but that's going to lead to maybe an unintentional headbutt on every single play. Some of the changes, though, that I think are positive moving forward. I go back 17 years when I finished playing college football. It feels like 117 years ago.
17 years?
17 years.
My God,
yes,
you're old, man.
I am. I'm an old man.
But it was the helmets have changed. I mean, there used to be like that one bar across your helmet, right? Face mask?
I was just after the leather helmets.
Yeah.
I just missed those. That's one of the things I was going to get to, though. I mean, I can remember my high school locker room. We watched a video every year in high school, and it was like the Chuck Cecil video, like, don't hit with the crown of your helmet.
Oh, yeah.
And that was it. But I grew up watching NFL's Greatest Hits, and I had that on VHS.
Crunch Course. You remember Crunch Course?
That's what we wanted. And I wanted to be Ronnie Lott or Chuck Cecil or Mike Singletary or Steve Atwater. Yeah. That's how I wanted to hit dudes. That's how I wanted to play football. I think the mindset of how to play the game is still evolving and still changing. But you mentioned the headgear. I mean, there's a helmet called the Vices helmet that's out now. It's a soft shell helmet. The 3D imaging that's taking place with some of the Rydell helmets, they're doing a precision fit that's basically trying to keep from your head moving around inside of your helmet when you do take some of these bigger hits. Schutt has the F7 Tectonic helmet, which is the one that looks like a helmet phone, like it's got the giant phone on top of the helmet that you can just yank it out, which is supposed to sort of act as like tectonic plates. When you take a hit, part of the helmet shifts to keep your brain intact. Yeah, the technology is still coming along, and I think if there's a positive to look at from this CTE article that came out in the New York Times, it is enlightening us to what needs to be done. And the game needs to be improved from a safety perspective, and that maybe needs to be at the top of the emphasis list of how the game is going to change moving forward.
Well, and Cole, here's kind of my takeaway from this as a player, because I completely agree, and I think there's been very positive waves of change from a technology standpoint to a targeting and to a rules implementation standpoint, both in college and the NFL. But I don't think it's enough. Because of what you mentioned, this is not a problem with the biggest of hits. It's not a problem with the highlight hits as much as it is what you call the subconcussive hits that happen on a daily basis at practice, that happen in the trenches on a daily basis. No matter how you teach it, you are not going to take those subconcussive hits out of the front line. It's just not going to happen. You can't play the sport without it. So inherently, my biggest issue, or what needs to be done here, is not as much with the rules and the protection, although that needs to continually be honed in and that will continually protect players, but it starts with our youth. And I have some very strong opinions about this because I came from a family where my dad played college football back in the day when they had semi-professional leagues. He played semi-pro ball here out in California as a lineman. Me and my brother, who both played quarterback and both played in college and the NFL, were not allowed to play football. We're not allowed to play tackle football until high school. That was our family rule. My oldest brother played receiver. He didn't play high school. He didn't play football or tackle football until freshman year of high school. Now, my dad allowed me and my brother to play 8th grade year because we both wanted to be quarterbacks, and he understood that came with a little different responsibility. And he wanted us to get our feet wet, wanted us to get a little more acclimated before high school. But his goal here was to protect us. From an injury standpoint, didn't want us to get burned out on the sport, didn't want us to get injured from a head standpoint, anything like that. Although it was his dream for us to play, he wanted to protect us. And no matter what, and this is what you just mentioned, Cole, with the heads-up movement, with teaching these coaches from youth football to coach this better, be more technical in what you're and how you're teaching these players to tackle. But here's my problem. It's always going to miss because you are asking pre-adolescent, you're asking kids that their mobility, their coordination is not at a level that they can control. Even with the best of coaching, they cannot control the aspects of movement as specifically as maybe an adult can to protect themselves. So as much coaching as we're going to put in place, you can't protect kids that can't necessarily protect themselves because they are still maturing. They're still growing into their bodies. And so you're putting adolescent brains, you're putting youth brains at risk from these just subconcussive hits that are going to happen. Whether your head is up or whether your head is down, these hits over time are going to take a toll. And that's the biggest issue that I have with CTE is that I'm not going to allow my kids to play tackle football.
Ooh.
And that's just true. I'm not going to allow them to
news.
play until they get to a point where I believe that their coordination and maturity allows them to be able to protect themselves in the manner that will keep them safe. Now, is it in my heart? And I know, Cole, you're a dad, so you can speak about this in a second, but is it in my heart that they play football? Absolutely. It defined me. It defined a period of my life. I think it set a tone for the person I am now post-career, as a business person, in my relationships. So many good positive things come out of that, but I don't believe it's necessary. And anybody they want can argue with me on this point I'm about to make because I'm about to drop another hot take here. I know it's early, but we're getting into it.
Hey, we're going to get back into CTE later in the show, too. So
I
you
do
gotta
not
dangle
believe,
something in
I know,
front of everybody.
I do not believe that there is one positive or position or skill that cannot be learned doing flag football that you need to be successful at tackle football. And we can get into that later. But I don't know how you feel about it, Cole, being a dad. That's where I come from.
Cole, if you want to hang on to that thought, we'll definitely get back into this because I know you guys are passionate about it, and I got a couple of questions. I can just envision, like, in the future, everyone's going to be looking like Lord Helmet from Spaceballs.
Right?
This is The Locker Room on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Pretty unfortunate. A wild and bizarre situation for Hugh Freeze over at Ole Miss. I don't think anybody could have predicted that it would all come crashing down for him like that. And the whole backstory of it is pretty interesting with finding out what kind of and who he was calling on his cell phone, which was the university-issued cell phone. So you can go on and on about how that really just blew up in his face. But just getting back to Ole Miss and how far back does this put them as a football team? I heard some people say what's going to happen to some of the recruits now or first-year guys on their football team. Cole, we'll start with you and get your thoughts on Ole Miss. Does it set them back? Are they back to being cellar dwellers where they were before they got the good fortune of all those five-star recruits in recent years?
Well, Pat, you're not going to be able to.
Did I throw too much shade on that situation?
No, I think you're good.
I'm trying to get my Hogs in your eyes. I'm trying to get the Hogs out of 7th place in the SEC West.
Yeah, trust me, there have been plenty of you guys on Twitter that have been giving me a hard enough time on that, but not since 2008.
Oh, by the way, that's at Cole Cubelic for anybody that wants to get at Cole.
I need more Arkansas hate coming my way via Twitter. I would say not since the mid-2000s when The Wire was released on HBO have burner phones been such a hot topic of conversation. But, this is a football team, Pat. The unfortunate part, I've been through a coaching change. Mine took place actually mid-season.
And who was yours?
When Terry Bowden stepped down, or if you want to believe the administration stepped down, most of us believe that he was fired. He was forced out. On Friday night before we played Louisiana Tech the next day. So we went to our team movie. Our routine, we stayed in LaGrange, Georgia, which was about 40 minutes outside of Auburn, Alabama. We would get on the bus at Sewell Hall, which was the team dorm. We would ride to a movie theater just outside of town in Opelika, Alabama, and then we would go to our team hotel on Friday night. We go watch the movie. I think we watched Thin Red Line, and it wasn't actually a great film. And we get on the bus, and all of a sudden, this is when I've really aged myself in this show today. It's kind of embarrassing, but only a couple guys on the team had cell phones at the time because it wasn't they weren't readily available like they are now. And so you start hearing a couple dudes, like one kid on special teams on the third bus. He's like, "Hey man, Feinbaum's saying that Terry's gone. My mom just called me." We're like, "What?" So we get on the bus and we head back towards Auburn, and we're like, "Oh hell, here we go. This is not good." And we pull back into Sewell Hall, where our dining room was at the top of our dorm. We all walk in. They say team meeting. Coach Bowden comes in about 15 minutes later. All the assistants were there. Tells us, I'm not going to be your head coach tomorrow. Nothing I can do about it. I hate it. I'm sorry. I've appreciated coaching you guys, everything you did, and I'm finished. Now, whether or not we had a bunch of talent on that team, which we did have some good football players, that was a distraction every day moving forward. And I think that's the most difficult part for this Ole Miss football team is the reward for these players, Jordan, is to be on that football field playing games. And you only get to do it so much. There's a very small amount of time that you actually spend, especially comparatively to what you do on a daily basis as a collegiate football player, that you're able to take part in games. And I think the worst part about it for this team is it will be a distraction for the rest of the season. Even though Matt Luke's the interim coach and they're probably not going to do anything before the end of the season, they're going to wait to see what the NCAA says. But this team's got talent. This team's got a boatload of talent on offense. And I look at guys like Shea Patterson and DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown at wide receiver. They're going to be able to score a lot of points, but can they get past the distraction? And that's something that team that I was on struggled with, because what we don't understand and we don't see a lot of times as fans is there's a lot of assistant coaches on that team that have one foot out the door. They're already looking for other jobs. They're concerned about their job security moving forward. There are players that are considering transferring. There are players that are questioning their decision to even come there. And now all of a sudden maybe the guy who brought you there, the one who you trusted the most and why you came to Ole Miss, is not going to be there. So the juggling act of keeping these players motivated, keeping them involved, keeping them focused, which is hard enough for the young kids these days, I think is going to be the biggest task of whether or not Ole Miss can be competitive on a weekly basis. But make no mistake, Pat, this Ole Miss team is going to scare some teams in the SEC West this fall because this offense is going to be explosive, and they are going to score a ton of points.
How about that? This is the Locker Room with Jordan Rodgers. That was Cole Cubelic, and I'm Pat Bradley. Jordan, I'm going to hand it off to you here because you guys are involved in this on a daily basis. I just cannot think about what's wrong with some of these coaches, like how they step over the line and get caught in situations like these. And they've got not only the whole program, but you get kids and families who they affect by their poor decisions. Cole went through a coaching change. Have you gone through anything like that? And how it affected the team and you and your preparation?
Yeah, and for one, it's an arms race. So all these coaches are trying to cut corners, whether it's in a shady manner or as much in a respectable manner. But there's always angles to be had by coaches. That's inevitable. Now, obviously, there's a line that doesn't get crossed, and it was severely crossed. But from a player standpoint, similar to what Cole said, I went through a coaching change my first year at Vandy. I transferred in from a junior college. Bobby Johnson was the head coach there, had been the head coach for about 8 years, I believe it was, and almost this exact same timing to a point of a week ago, Bobby Johnson in a team meeting, just out of absolutely nowhere, said, I won't be your coach anymore. I'm actually moving on. The staff will stay intact. Robbie Caldwell is going to take over as the interim head coach. He wanted to give his coaching staff actually maybe a chance to play their way into sticking around. I think he saw the writing on the wall. It was time for him to move on. But from a short-term standpoint, when you look at the fallout of what happened with Hugh Freeze, on the short term, I actually think it's going to make this team stronger. Now, that will be severely tested by wins and losses. And if they have momentum, this is a back-against-the-wall type of thing. And, Cole, you've been in locker rooms right now. That locker room is as angry with a chip on their shoulder as they have ever been. And so there would be a distinct distraction outside the locker room if Hugh Freeze was still the head coach. I actually think it behooves their immediate success a little bit more to have him out of the way. Now, that only because it creates a different environment inside that locker room. Everybody has a little more anger, a little more something to prove, a little more of a chip on their shoulder now that they have really felt they've been wronged by the guy that they put their trust in. Now, that's going to be tested, as I said, with those wins and losses. You win, that continues to build momentum. You lose, you have the risk of a mass exodus. You have the risk of players kind of chalking it up. Okay, well, we knew this season wasn't going to be anything anyway. So it's very fragile from a standpoint of inside that locker room. But when you have a guy, you have a chance. Yeah. And Shea Patterson's a guy. And so they have a chance to win games. And really, we've seen it happen before. Coaches are able to rebuild programs when you have a guy. They're able to continue to recruit. Now, it's going to be difficult, and it's not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years as far as a full turnaround, but there is still a lot to be won, both outside of the program and inside of the program in the form of wins and losses with this 2017 Ole Miss team. And they got a shot. They do. This is not writing on the wall. This is not chalk it up, our season's over. Wesley McGriff is one of my favorite coaches I have ever played for. Not only can he recruit his butt off, but he can coach, and that defense is going to have a different mentality as well. They got a quarterback. I think their defense is going to be much improved. Now, we'll see the fragileness of that locker room after that first loss or second loss. Can they rebound and stick together? That's going to be really...
I think that's the important thing because, a few years back, it was something kind of similar when Arkansas coach Bobby Petrino was shown the door after his what he went through. And then you had a situation where it was a team that was set up for success. They went through early adversity, and then everything fell apart. And I think it was a combination of they didn't have that same voice from their leader that they had, the whole season and recruiting, and then you had a situation where guys, because that same voice wasn't there, they sort of had their own goals, the individual goals. They sort of lost focus on what the team goals were. And I think that's probably the biggest thing for Ole Miss because they do have a lot of talent on that team. They have guys that can play on the next level. If you don't have that constant voice of keeping everybody on the same page of what you accomplish as a team, and you guys know how easy it is, they've got people right now in the air saying, oh, it's going to be all blown up this year. Just make sure you take care of yourself. Stay healthy. Make sure you get your numbers because you're looking for what you can do at the end of the season. And those voices are always there, but the one thing you can count on mostly is when you have that strong leader, that head coach who's running everything, he can sort of put everybody in place because he's earned that. He's recruited you. You developed a relationship with him being the lead guy. So now if there's going to be adversity and there's going to be some cracks there, what's going to happen? Like you said, are they going to respond by coming together? Adversity makes some people break and other people break records. It's just going to be interesting to see if they can handle all of that around that program. And you guys, you'd know more than anybody to see. Ole Miss is an interesting place. It'll be fun to see them try to respond to what they've been going through this year.
Pat, I think you look at who do you lean on? And Jordan brings up a good point with the staff. And you've got an offensive coordinator in Phil Longo. It's his first year, but he stays put. It's going to be a similar system to what they were running under Hugh Freeze in his entire tenure in Oxford. Wesley McGriff handles the defense. He's still going to be there. Most of the guys around them still there. But you've got one senior starter on this offense. You got maybe 3 senior starters on that defense. When things do begin to go bad, and they will, who you leaning on? Who's the guy that's stepping up? You got a sophomore quarterback that's played half a season going to do it? You got DK Metcalf, a sophomore receiver that went out after the 3rd game of the year last year. That's who I think you have to have in a situation like this, and that would be my biggest concern if I was an Ole Miss fan, is who are the guys in the locker room that can grab this thing by the reins and take that leadership. And you look at the schedule, South Alabama, UT Martin, at Cal. That doesn't look too bad to start the season. Then you take a week off at Alabama, at Auburn, Vandy, LSU, Arkansas, at Kentucky, Louisiana, A&M, at Mississippi State.
Lights out. Yeah, well, it's going to be a challenge, yeah. It's going to be a challenge.
This is The Locker Room on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
My whole career I've always been, kind of the people's champ in the locker room.
This is The Locker Room Podcast.
Major League Baseball, fellas. This from the AL East. David Price, Red Sox left-hander, who's got a lot of pressure on him to produce. A lot of pressure. He's dealt with some injuries, but he called out Dennis Eckersley, who works for the Red Sox broadcast. Well, obviously, you guys know Eckersley, Hall of Fame pitcher. And he was criticizing some of the younger Red Sox players. So David Price, on the team plane, waited for him to board the plane. And as I'm reading this, all I can imagine is like David Price, who looks like a pretty tall dude, has got 6, 7 Red Sox guys just standing around him waiting for Eckersley to get on the plane. And then he just starts laying into him, hammering him, tells him to, a few choice words, we don't need you, get out of here. And it all went back to him being critical of the players. You two gentlemen and myself working for the SEC Network, and we played in the SEC. You guys obviously playing Vandy and Auburn, and I played basketball at Arkansas. So we cover these teams, and we develop friendships I'm sure you guys, before you started with the network, still had a good relationship with your schools and the coaches that were there and some of the players. I personally got a call after one of the games I did last year. I'm not going to tell you from which coach or from what school, but it was after we called the game, and immediately, well, actually, I landed back in Little Rock. I get the call. I see his number on there. I said, uh-oh, because they had just given up like a 20-point lead on the road. He said, Pat, I just got done watching the film. I thought you were too critical of our players, our young guys. I can't. And he just went and laid into me. And he said, and I go, Coach, no problem, Coach. I apologize. And the best thing is, after he lays into me, he says, I hope you know, I feel like I can tell you this because we're friends. I say, okay, Coach. Absolutely, no problem. Won't happen again. And, he went on and on to say how it was his, worst loss, toughest loss that he's ever had. So I try to be conscious about not being critical because they are, we've been in their positions. Do you guys have that in the back of your mind? And, if you do, how do you kind of weave through that? And then I'm sure both of you, as a matter of fact, I know both of you have stories about coaches that have called you or called you out.
Yeah,
Jordan?
I have.
What was
Jordan,
that, Cole?
you want to? No, Jordan, go ahead.
Jordan just got called out by somebody. Can we say who it is?
Sumlin didn't take to a few comments I had. I think a lot of it has to do with context. And I think you got to have thick skin on both sides of this. For lack of a better saying, stay in your lane. Right, Cole? I mean, you know what? It's his job to coach. It's my job to evaluate. It's my job to evaluate players and coaches. Now, I think there's a fine line to taking it and being personal. Absolutely. And are there warranted times that if an analyst kind of steps over that line, and I'm sure we've all done it, on accident at times or just in the heat of a moment. But you got to have thick skin on that side. You got to understand that we have a job to do and you have a job to do. And I think the times you see it like this with Price and Eckersley's, you know what? There's probably a little bit of truth to it. So on Price's side, he probably felt like, you know what, I think he's kind of right, and that kind of ticked me off. When do we ever get really mad about the comments that are completely off the wall and not even close to being true? I laugh at those. It's the ones that I'm like, ooh, yeah, actually, that kind of makes me look bad, and he might be right. Those are the ones that get you mad as a player and as an analyst. So you take it with a grain of salt, and you got to understand that we have a job to do as well, and as long as we can be very careful with that line of having respect from a former player standpoint and also not getting personal, I think that's important. If we stay in our lane of analyzing based on our experiences and what we see, I don't think you can ever really be wrong, even if you are being harsh at times.
Yeah, I would agree with Jordan, and I think the context aspect of what he brought up is very real. And you develop personal relationships with coaches, with players, assistant coaches, and I think if you can not go to a personal level, then it should never be problematic for either side. Because like Jordan said, we have a job to do. And if I'm describing a how and a why an offensive line is playing well or playing poorly or a defensive line is not doing the job that they're put on the field to do, then really no coach or player should ever take that personal and have a problem with it. But there are times that certain guys maybe go overboard and are a little bit too negative on one position group or one player, and I can see where that would be taken as a problem. I had an offensive line coach 2 years ago called me personally and said, hey, I heard you say my left tackle ain't playing no good. And I said, what are you referencing? He said, an interview on certain station. I said, that's cool. Did you hear the interview? He said, well, no, but somebody called me and told me about it. I said, well, I'll get you audio of the interview. I'll send it to you, and then you can call me and tell me what you have a problem with, and I can tell you the other 15 things that kid was doing during the game that weren't good that I left out of that interview. So that ended that.
This is The Locker Room on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
The Dallas Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott, which I don't know how you guys feel, but I thought he was, other than that offensive line, which, Cole, I figured you were going to bring that up for sure, but he was their most important guy last year. And I'm sure you've been keeping up with it. There's been incident after incident with Ezekiel Elliott. You can read them, and I'm sure you guys know. It's nothing. The more serious of the incidents, it's still, there was a domestic violence issue that did not turn out the way that a lot of people thought. So now there are reports that the NFL owners are pressuring Roger Goodell to bring the hammer down on Ezekiel Elliott and the Cowboys. And Jerry Jones, as you'd imagine, said he's absolutely going to go nuts if they do lay down some sort of suspension for Ezekiel Elliott. They got rid of Lucky Whitehead after he went through his issue, which turned out not to be him, which was kind of strange. So my question is, should he be treated differently, Ezekiel Elliott? Do you think there's anything behind this? And I was preaching this when that happened to Tom Brady. No, I said, you better be careful, everybody that wants Brady suspended, because at some point it's going to happen to your team. It's going to happen to somebody that you know. I'm sure you guys have had some experience with guys who were able to get away with certain things. You have a problem with Ezekiel Elliott not being suspended or having anything happen to him from the league? Cole?
I have a problem with it because Roger Goodell and the NFL's office have rules in place to handle when something goes wrong and somebody goes awry. I don't think you can, as an individual player on a team, I think it's a little bit different. You just inherently know certain guys are going to get different treatment. You might not like it. And we talked about this with LeBron a little bit earlier. LeBron gets away with certain things, and he can act as the GM and the head coach because he's the best player on the planet. A lot of times the best player on the football team is going to do some things a little bit differently, whether it's a tailback or receiver. I can remember a time at Auburn we had a wide receiver that just didn't want to show up for practice. And he didn't come to practice Monday, didn't come Tuesday, didn't come Wednesday. All of a sudden he's out there in shells on Thursday, and he's playing in the game. And I can remember another time we had a wide receiver that could not practice and was cramping up at practice because he had to do punishment running every morning the week we played Florida. Now, he's cramping up at practice in the afternoon because he's running stadiums in the morning for missing class. But who gets the reps in the game? The wide receiver who couldn't make it through practice because he was cramping up because he had so much punishment work to do. The reality is there's so much pressure on these coaches, and there's so much pressure on these franchises to go out and win games. They're going to do whatever they can do to protect those W's. And if that means treating a player a little bit differently, then by God, they're probably going to do it. I'm not saying I like it, not saying that I agree with it. But I do think that a potential collusion from other ownership trying to say that they think that Zeke Elliott should be suspended, I'd be interested to hear how that's going over with Jerry Jones because that's I can imagine he'd be a little upset with that.
But I guarantee it's happening. Isn't that what you do? That's what I do. If I'm another owner and Ezekiel's got some dirt out there, hey, Roger, man, you really need to take care of this. It's not a good look for the NFL's image. We got a young star that's got, repetitive issues, whether there's validity or not. Where there's smoke, there's fire, water. I guarantee there's some truth to some aspect of it, whether it is to the degree that, the alleged are proposing or not. Either way, you have an image issue. And when you're the NFL, that's of utmost importance, especially what have we been talking about for 2 segments today, CTE. That's a big image issue with the NFL, and things they don't want people to know is they pulled out half of their $30 million investment into research they started in 2012. Didn't hear that, did we? Because that would look bad for the NFL image until the players are able to fight and get more of a standardized protocol for administering discipline, which will probably be something that maybe is addressed at the next CBA. Roger Goodell plays judge and jury, and he has the opportunity to do that, and it's not fair. And it's not fair that Ezekiel Elliott is a superstar and he should be treated differently. And you know how he should be treated differently, in my opinion? He should be suspended because he is an NFL superstar right now and a young superstar. I think Goodell needs to treat NFL's image and what that looks like on the outside. And there's a repetitive behavior issue here that needs to be stopped because Ezekiel is going to be in the league for a very, very long time, and Goodell uses these opportunities as statements. And I think he needs to make a statement, and until there's more standardized protocol for these type of things, and that'll be on the players to bring to the CBA, he has the opportunity to do that. When I started drinking coffee, Cole? My rookie year in Tampa, because I knew if I nodded off in a meeting, I'd be gone. I was a practice squad third string. I sure as heck knew Dan Orlovsky or Mike Glennon, a third-round draft pick, they could nod off and coach would kind of, nudge them, but hey, stay up. I know it's a long 4-hour meeting. I knew sure as heck if my eyes even blinked when they weren't supposed to, I would be gone. They had no investment in me. I started drinking black coffee as much as possible. Players are treated differently. Roger Goodell is going to treat this differently, and in my opinion, I think it should merit a suspension, if anything, to nip this in the bud because things are coming out and continuing to come out. Nightclub incidents, domestic violence. Whether there's validity, something's got to be done to get this kid back on track, in my opinion.
That's Jordan Rodgers, Cole Cubelic. I'm Pat Bradley. This is The Locker Room. Let's stick with the NFL training camp. Cole, talk about a guy that you know pretty well. been watching him and his development. Cam Newton, the idea of changing how his style is, how the offense is for the Panthers, I think anybody watching him knows just what kind of a freak athlete he is. I always thought to myself, how long can this guy continue to play the way he does and take the hits he does? He's saying doesn't like the changes coming about. Do you think he's going to be able to transition into that?
No, I don't think so, because I think inherently it's who he is as a football player. I mean, can you guys imagine going back and telling, Bill Walsh telling Steve Young or Mike Shanahan telling Steve Young, hey, 3rd and 6, that crossing route goes across the middle of the field, and the pass rush gets a little bit wide. We don't want you running there to try and go pick up that first down. Or telling Brett Favre not to scramble and keep his eyes downfield and trying to find something that might put him in harm's way. Guys have a certain style as to how they play the game, and it's inherently makes them who they are. Now, can Mike Shula, the offensive coordinator in Carolina, alter some of the play calls? And maybe will we see less designed runs, maybe less designed power runs off tackle for Cam Newton, things of that nature? Absolutely. And I still think that there can be a coaching aspect teetered to his game of helping him understand how to protect himself. Not necessarily saying, hey, Cam, don't run the football, but more of when you do run the football, maybe not press your luck as much as possible to get right up on that defender before you slide. Maybe go ahead and take that step out of bounds and sacrifice 2 or 3 yards that you might have picked up. So I do think there are ways to alter his game. But to sit back, guys, and especially Jordan from a quarterback's perspective, I know you can speak on this, to sit back and tell Cam Newton, don't run the football, or we don't want you or are not going to allow you to run the football, that's taking away a piece of his game that makes him valuable and helps you win football games.
I completely agree with part of that. And the part of it is, you know why no one ever went to Steve Young and said, hey, I want you to not tuck it down as much? Because Steve Young in his career was completing almost 65% of his passes. So he was playing within the pocket very, very well. And he was playing outside the pocket very, very well. The running aspect was a complementary skill set to being a very good pocket passer. Cam Newton is not. Cam Newton is sub 55%. You want to know the last time a mobile quarterback won a Super Bowl not completing over 60% of their balls? It doesn't happen. Even Russell Wilson was completing a high percentage of his balls. So this is an attempt, I think, to force Cam Newton to do more work off of the field and prep more like an in-the-pocket quarterback so he can excel at that. They don't want to completely diminish this aspect of his game, and you never would want to. So I'm not in the locker room. I don't know how that conversation is going between the coaching staff and Cam Newton, but I sure as heck hope it's not going like, hey, you need to run less, because that's not the answer. But, hey, you need to get through your progressions a little more consistently and then run. Maybe not go 1-2 run, which Cam is gifted as the best athlete, I think, to ever play the position. So you do not want him to utilize that. But you also have to be more consistent as a quarterback or you're not going to have success. You have to complete more balls.
Have you seen quarterbacks in this stage of their careers, are they able to make that adjustment? Because it seems like a mindset with Cam Newton. I mean, he loves playing that way, and he does it so well. You're not talking about a high school kid or even early on in his college years. Can you make the transition now?
Well, I think there's part of it that's learned, and I think part of seeing the game and anticipating is very learned. I think maybe slightly a larger part of that is inherent. And so there's a combination or there's a balance here at play. Obviously, the more you're within one offense, the more you have stability, the more comfortable you are, the more that becomes second nature. So absolutely can still be learned. And those things that completely can continually be refined for what you see. I mean, these quarterbacks in the NFL, the longer you're in an offense, I mean, you know it, Cole, whether you're an offensive lineman or a quarterback, the more comfortable you are, the more it becomes second nature. So when you're an athletic quarterback and you're gifted far beyond anybody else on the field, sure as heck, go run around people. And he does it very, very well, and that's a part of his game you never want to lose. But it's absolutely something that he can improve on, and I think he has to improve on that in order to extend his career just from a physical standpoint. He takes a beating, but also allow his team to be better set up for sustainability within the offense. Mobile quarterbacks bring an element that you cannot match, an element in really an element that brings fear in any defense, but it also sometimes lacks stability. And that's hard as an offensive coordinator. And that just gets down to completing more balls. So Cam being more comfortable, them setting up the offense to allow him to be more comfortable with the passing plays that they do call will allow his legs to be even more dangerous because he provides a better threat as a passer.
Maybe Cam needs to go a little bit LeBron James and play front office and say, guys, I need some weapons.
Yeah.
I got to do better than Greg Olsen. Teddy Ginn Jr. is my go-to receiver. Kelvin Benjamin's coming in at 270. Help me out a little bit on the perimeter, guys.
Completely.
This is The Locker Room on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
My whole career I've always been, kind of the people's champ in the locker room.
This is The Locker Room Podcast.
We just got done talking about Nick Saban, and he has a unique perspective, all right? There's only one guy like him, and he's on the top of the mountain with Urban Meyer. I don't know how many of those elite guys you put there. Probably Jimbo Fisher. I'm sure we talked about it. And he talked about playing just Power 5 teams. And with that, it's going to affect a lot of other teams. One of the other things he talked about is playing a tough first game. Some coaches like it. Other coaches, you can look at the schedule. They're playing what we like to call some cream puffs to start their season. Let's start out with Nick Saban and what he had to say about his team opening up with a really tough first game.
I think it does things that affect your off season. I think your players are more focused. They work a little harder. They prepare a little better. They understand the challenge of the first game, and they're not really looking past that because it is such a huge challenge for them. I think it helps your fall camp in terms of your preparation. And certainly when you play the game, you really find out very quickly where you are as a team and some of the things that you need to work on because you're playing against some really good competition. So there's a lot to be said for that. I kind of enjoy playing in these kind of games. The challenges of them are great. And I think it prepares you really well for some of the tough games you have in your conference down the road as well.
That was Nick Saban on Mike and Mike, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Jordan, not a lot of coaches can start the season the way they can. Early losses may put your team behind. What do you think about what he said there?
No, I think it's absolutely valid. I completely agree with the changing tone and preparation of your team in the offseason. At Vandy, we were usually one of the teams that everyone overlooked for that first game of the year. But my senior year, we played the Thursday night opener against South Carolina. First time I think Vandy had really maybe even ever done that, or at least on the stage that we did that. Completely changed our entire offseason mentality. What we had ahead of us, kind of that first big exclamation mark or statement that we wanted to make. So agree with it. And also when you look at the college football playoffs, you don't want to lose late. Right? You want to lose early. So get a barometer, get a measuring stick early, and if it happens to be a loss, people are going to forget that towards the end of the season if you rattle off 8, 9 in a row.
I agree.
Cole,
I think
you liked it, right, Cole?
Yeah, if you're Nick Saban, you're in a great spot to do this. Your team should compete for a national title every year. So him going up against Florida State, from a talent perspective, he knows that's at worst going to be a wash. He's not going to play a team that's more talented than his. So you coach them up and you get them ready for the opener. Some things are going to be different for that team. That front seven is not going to be near what it was a year ago. They're going to have a new offensive coordinator. They're still going to have probably a true sophomore starting at left tackle, a true sophomore starting at quarterback, and potentially a true freshman starting at right tackle. So they're going to have a younger football team, especially on offense. But his team is set up to do this and take on Florida State. Now, we haven't even gotten into the revenue that it brings in. They're getting a pretty big check to go play in Atlanta in that football game. So that's one part of it, and he knows that's going to help the program down the road. And the exposure is great. They're now able to bring recruits to this game. So Alabama and Florida State can both have recruits at a brand-new football stadium that what kid's not going to want to go watch play, even if you don't even plan on going to Florida State or Alabama. If you're a recruit and you're invited to go watch that game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I think you're signing up for that, no doubt. And then it's going to be nationally televised. But Jordan's right. You're able to potentially lose this game, and you have the entire schedule in front of you to be able to bounce back, scratch and claw, and potentially end up back in the national championship game, which has worked for Alabama in the past. We saw them lose to LSU, don't even play in their conference title game, and then smash LSU in the national championship game in 2011. So I agree with the motivating factors in the offseason. It shouldn't take that for kids to want to get set up and get ready to go for game one, but you know it has to be extra motivation, knowing that you better be on your A game, and you don't want to get embarrassed against a football team week one and sort of set the tone for the rest of the season. So playing that kind of an opponent early, if I'm Nick Saban and I have that kind of football team, I think it's fantastic. You're going to play one Power 5 anyway. Might as well go ahead and get it out of the way.
The other thing he touched on, too, was having so much time, and this is a Nick Saban problem. He says it's hard to go 27 days without playing a game and then go into the playoffs. But there's not many teams that are always going to be in the playoff, and you got to take that amount of time off between the conference championship and then the 14 playoff. It's just a unique situation. But he did touch on the bowl games as well, and I understand, and it took me a while to come on board with all the bowl games because I just didn't understand how teams that basically had a 500 season and now they allow 5 and 7 teams to go to a bowl game. And I got on board slowly but surely, talking to guys like you, the experience. And for me, it would be like the NCAA tournament and things like that. That's why I think you should even open up the NCAA tournament to more basketball teams. I wouldn't mind that at all, just because of the experience of what you guys went through. And he talked about bowl games and some issues that he had about it. But I know you two are on board, or I think you are, Cole. I don't know about you, Jordan. Jordan, where are you on with these bowl games and these teams at 6-6 or even 5-7 being able to still play?
I actually can't stand it.
You don't like it?
I was a 6-6 team that went to a bowl game, and albeit I think the fourth or maybe fifth. I think it was fourth. No, I think it was fifth bowl game in school history, and it still was a sour taste in my mouth. Especially losing that bowl game, you ended up with a 6-7 record. This is tough because especially when it comes to college football, more so than the NFL. There's so many positives on both sides of the argument. The positive on the argument of the bowl game is, that's something that is huge for players. It's huge for recruiting. It's huge for developing players. You get an extra month of practice with these guys that are going to be maybe names that you didn't hear in your bowl season, but are going to be big players the next year. So there's a lot of benefit. It's one of the things that, me and Cole, we were laughing about it on one of the breaks. The gift suites, that's something that you remember. You still have some of those gifts somewhere, hidden away. But on the other side of it, at one point last year, there's 80 bowls, and there's only 69 eligible or 68 eligible teams. And then you go to, the academic aspect.
But isn't that just a number, though? I mean, somebody can, whoever it is that announces what a record has to be to go in a bowl, can't they just wave their wand and say, okay, now 5-7 is acceptable, right?
I would love it to be the other way around. I'd love it to be 7-5. I think if you have a winning record, you deserve it. I'm not a fan of participation trophies. I'm giving it back if my kid ever gets one. I'm a fan of earning things, and I think you got to at least have better than a 500 record to earn to go to a bowl game. Now, does that fix anything to take away from some of those teams and the opportunities and the players? Absolutely. That's why there's maybe not a right answer for it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And listen, here's the thing. You got on board, Pat,
for
the reason that I got on board and that most of America gets on board. We love football. Who
I love going to the bowl games.
Yeah, give me more
Spend
football.
a whole week somewhere. Yeah, it's a great time.
I want more football, and I want to watch more football and want to consume more football. So I'm never going to complain about bowl games and having more bowl games. But I'm with Jordan. You get a team that's 6-6. You get a team that's 5-7. That's nice that you're giving them credit for their APR and academically they're doing the right things. They get to go to a bowl. It just doesn't feel great. But look at a team like Mississippi State. They're 5-7. Their APR gets them into a bowl. Fitzgerald goes down there, gets a win. That may be something that catapults them into having a season that's better than most people anticipate in Starkville this fall. So you get those extra practices. The younger guys get more reps. You get a trip that most people wouldn't take. Listen, I got the pet Shamu down in Orlando. We went to the Citrus Bowl. You don't think I'm ever going to forget that?
And you sleep with that, right, every night?
Exactly. We went to Disney World on Christmas Day. I'm not forgetting that. So those
don't
moments.
Forget all the per diem you
know
got,
what? You're
right,
lucky. Cole, you're lucky because I never got to get out of Tennessee for a bowl game. Ooh. We went to the Liberty Bowl in Memphis, so we hopped on a bus, and it was even more disappointing 6-6 to go to Memphis. Although I love Memphis, it was fun to hang out there, see the scene. But then my senior year, we went Music City Bowl, so we didn't travel far. I remember actually our coach coming in to the leadership group and saying, hey, we got kind of two bowl games. Vanderbilt's been to Music City before, or we could go to, and I'm going to forget the name, but it was on January 6th in Birmingham. And I was like, no way. I don't want to wait another week. I want to, let's play and be done. I want to get to the off season, and I'd rather be in Nashville. But those are memories that you love. I wish I could.
You don't even get travel money for that, right? I mean, because you had to go just across the street.
Yep,
Pat,
not much.
I'll sell you guys on bowl games. 1996, I'm a redshirt freshman. We go play in the, at the time, Poulan Weed Eater Independence Bowl, Shreveport, Louisiana.
God.
Now, we're under 21, so we can't go to the boats and gamble, which is what a lot of the older kids would do and basically why people go to Shreveport. We saw Vanilla Ice perform twice on our trip to Shreveport, Louisiana for the Poulan Weed Eater Independence Bowl. Played Army, beat Army. So you tell me if
That's worth
bowl
it.
trips are meaningless.
True.
You put that company out of business. I don't even know what that is.
This is The Locker Room on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Colin Kaepernick. Joe Flacco goes down. It's funny how we hear about all, like, leading up to it, the discussion around, will the Ravens bring him in, is so much discussion, but they don't ever bring him in. Blake Bortles, you just hear about through, 5 picks? Now talking about the Jaguars possibly interested. It's just amazing to me how the discussion around it, there shouldn't be any discussion unless they bring him in, first of all. I want to get your guys' take on that, but first, let's hear from Dan Graziano, ESPN NFL insider.
I'm so lost with all the questions on Kaepernick now. I mean, at the beginning of the offseason, he had high hopes in free agency, as did a lot of people who didn't get big free agent contracts and had to settle for one-year prove-it deals or veteran minimum deals or a camp invite. That happens all the time. For some reason, Colin Kaepernick has not been able to secure those things, even though we've long passed the point of free agency where teams would expect the player to adjust his expectations downward, as Kaepernick surely had. So I don't buy that as an excuse. I don't buy the priority thing as an excuse. There's plenty of players who do plenty of stuff in terms of activism off the field. This is very simple. Teams don't want to bring in Colin Kaepernick because they're afraid they're going to upset their fans or a segment of their fans who can't stand what Kaepernick decided to stand for. John Mara's comments about how he got more emails on this than any other issue, that hidden in those comments is the idea that, well, if I got these emails, then so did everybody else, and you can understand why people would have trepidation. Fair enough, I guess. But to me, if that's the reason this guy's not signed, then I think a lot of these teams need to look in the mirror and assess, their own level of bravery or cowardice when it comes to, doing the right thing.
That was Dan Graziano earlier this week on Freddie and Fitz, weekdays 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Those gentlemen are up late, providing good information. Cole, I'm going to start with you because you sort of looked at it from a couple different angles. One of them were the numbers side of it with the roster, and how do you think that all fits in with what Colin Kaepernick's, what's happening now with him?
I think that makes you, Pat, scratch your head a little bit more. I mean, you look at it, it's a simple numbers game. 32 NFL teams, you're going to carry 2. That's 64 quarterback spots. Some are going to carry 3. Yeah. Are there 64, 70 quarterbacks who we think could be more effective than Colin Kaepernick in the NFL? Now, some teams do have maybe draft picks from the past season, 2-3 seasons that they're grooming behind their starters, and a lot of teams are set with their starters. I get it, but it has to make you wonder, are there realistically that many guys who are capable of doing in an NFL uniform, playing that position, what Colin Kaepernick is capable of doing? And I'm not confident saying that I believe that there are. I do think there are some distractions around him. If there's one thing that I would love to hear from, and I know Colin Kaepernick is shy, I know he doesn't like the attention, I would like to hear from Colin Kaepernick. I would like to know what Colin Kaepernick is demanding, what his expectations are on being a part of a roster, what kind of guaranteed money he's looking for. We know the salary demands are somewhere between $8 and $10 million a year. That's not absurd, even for an NFL backup quarterback money. But the whole thing about how much does football mean to him, I get it. He does some other things, and I'm cool with that. That's fine. I wouldn't have a problem with that if I was an NFL GM or owner. But I think as a general public, if we're gonna take one stance on this, and we're gonna take an extremely strong stance on this, I'd like to hear from the man himself as to what his expectations are for being part of an NFL club, an NFL franchise, and we don't really know that right now.
Cole, this will get me fired up now. I completely agree with the numbers aspect of it. I'm also going to completely disagree with the numbers. But I'm going to start this conversation by saying this. If Cam Newton took a knee last year during the national anthem, would he be on an NFL roster right now?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, right?
Name it. Brady, Rodgers, Breeze, Roethlisberger, Newton. I mean, name it. Russell Wilson. If any of those guys took a knee, they would be on an NFL roster right now. Here's what it comes down to.
And there's two parts of this. Part of it does have to do with the off the field, which I'm going to address secondly. The first comes down to skill set and the product that is on the field. Product on the field has not been up to par. Let's just state that. Now, is there a ton of talent there? Absolutely. There is a ton of talent, but the talent fits into a very unique offense. And from a number standpoint, if you're saying he is not a starter today in the NFL, he is not one of the top 32. Now, you can't take all 32 teams because he doesn't fit all 32 teams' offensive game plan. Right? He doesn't. He fits a smaller portion of what teams cater their offense to. So if you're going to bring in a backup, you have to exactly take into account their skill set. And you do not bring a backup in that you have to change the offense. So the number of teams that would be interested in take all the off-the-field issues off the plate right now, interested in his skill set, diminishes. It's a handful at most. Now, you bring into that the off-the-field issues. A backup quarterback, a third string, a fourth string, a second quarterback needs to be a fly on the wall. Not only does he need to be a teammate that puts everything in front of himself for the betterment of the team, but no one needs to know his name. The best backup quarterbacks never get interviewed in the locker room. They're never on headlines. They're just there when they need to be there. They have a skill set that fits. They have a goal or they have a role for that team. You don't bring Kaepernick in right now because, yes, there's a distraction. And you know what? Unfortunately, that distraction is relevant to a much larger issue in this country that has a lot of validity, but it's still a distraction that takes away from your team and takes away from your starter, takes away from your goal. So not only does his skill set fit only a handful of teams, but you cannot tell me that you're mad that a third or fourth string camp arm is getting signed ahead of Kaepernick. They're in two different ballparks. You do not bring Kaepernick in as a camp arm. It doesn't happen. So people need to realize and put this in context. For one, he hasn't been very good. For two, he has a small skill set. For three, he's a distraction. And all that gets taken into account with validity.
Thanks for listening to the Locker Room Podcast. Make sure to subscribe by clicking the Listen tab on the ESPN app.